Michael, I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Well, I'd like to welcome you to the Parent Forum from Massachusetts Family Institute and Massachusetts Informed Parents. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon as we talk about what is being taught to our children in the public schools regarding comprehensive sex education. We hope this next hour is informative for you and helps you understand exactly what is being taught in your public school and what you can do as a parent to protect your children from what we believe to be explicit and even pornographic sex education. We are joined today by Massachusetts Informed Parents and Mary Ellen Siegler, who's been doing a lot of great research on this particular issue. We've had the privilege to travel to many different churches, community groups across the state already, educating parents on what they're teaching our children in the public schools. So Mary Ellen, want to thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Michael, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you virtually. And I would like to just jump right into my slideshow and take you through a tour of what's happening actually in regard to this issue and comprehensive sexuality education being taught in our schools. So give me just a minute here to, we're in the learning curve here with virtual events. So comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE, as you'll hear me refer to it, is actually an attack on our children, and that will become apparent to you as I continue through my presentation and just show you some evidence of what's being taught in Massachusetts schools. So what is CSE? CSE does not refer to sex education programs in general, but rather to a specific form of graphic sexuality education that claims to be evidence-based and age-appropriate. It aggressively promotes abortion and sexual freedom, high-risk sexual behaviors, and encourages the youngest of children to experiment sexually. It promotes a sexuality based on Alfred Kinsey's research and theories. Now, Alfred Kinsey, many of you may have heard of him before. He's known as the father of the sexual revolution. And Alfred Kinsey conducted research on the sexuality of what he claimed that children were sexual from birth and that they should be able to participate in all kinds of sexual activity, even from a young age. And he conducted his research collecting data from pedophiles. I know that sounds extreme, but you can look him up. And a great source and expert on Alfred Kinsey is Dr. Judith Reisman, a research professor at Liberty University. I highly recommend you take a look at some of the work that she's done. So CSE is designed to change the sexual and gender norms of society. The American College of Pediatrics has spoken out against CSE, expressing their concerns for the harms that it brings to children and teens. So when I'm evaluating curriculum, and when others in a national coalition who are also tracking this issue and doing deep research, 15 harmful elements are the curricula is evaluated to see if it contains any of one of these 15 harmful elements. And so I'm just going to kind of walk you through what these harmful elements are. 1, sexualizes children. It teaches children to consent to sex, normalizes anal and oral sex, promotes homosexual, bisexual behavior, promotes sexual pleasure, promotes solo and mutual masturbation, promotes condom use in inappropriate ways. An example of that is one of the activities that's included in one of the curricula is a condom relay race, where the students are lined up into teams and they have to compete racing to put a condom on properly on a wooden penis. So these are some of the ways that our students are being asked to participate in these activities to teach proper condom use. Another element is it promotes early sexual autonomy, and you'll see that kind of coming out also as I go through some of the actual curriculum. Also, it fails to establish abstinence as the expected norm. So now a lot of the proponents of CSE will say, well, our curriculum does include abstinence teaching, but what they don't explain is that the abstinence teaching that's included in the curriculum, it's really presented as being an equal option to being very sexually active. And so it's not held up as a superior choice. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is that abstinence, although it is included a small section in the curriculum, the rest of the curriculum actually undermines the abstinence message. So I like to explain it this way. It's kind of like telling your teens not to drink alcohol, but then throwing a party for them and their friends and buying them all a keg of beer. So it really, the rest of the curriculum is like a how-to manual on how to become sexually active. And so, of course, this ends up undermining the abstinence message. Also, it promotes transgender ideology, promotes contraception and abortion to children, promotes peer-to-peer sex ed or sexual rights advocacy. And I will talk more about what peer-to-peer sex ed means in some future slides here. It undermines traditional values and belief. It undermines parents or parental rights, and it refers children to harmful resources, and we'll talk more about that. So the curriculum that has been approved already by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or DESE for short, these are just some of the curriculum. Get Real by Planned Parenthood, Our Whole Lives, which was developed by the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ, and Making Proud Choices. Now, these are just 3 of many types of CSE curricula that is out there, but these 3 in particular have been evaluated by the department, by DESE here in Massachusetts, and they have listed them as meeting their standards. So let me just take you through some examples from some of these. Although this is not a comprehensive list of the type of curriculum that I'm finding in Massachusetts schools. There's others as well. So we have Get Real by Planned Parenthood. So for instance, in 6th grade, so these are students as young as 11 years old, you see that there's a discussion between 2 students getting a girl drunk so the boyfriend can make out with her. It introduces masturbation by an older brother. It involves scenario with a sexually active older sibling, making younger children keep it a secret from parents. So you'll see this undermining of parents and really separating children from their parents throughout. In some ways, it's very subtle, but it plants seeds of doubt in the students' minds as to whether or not their parents even have the, the adequate education or information on these issues. So it's really bringing separation between parents. So then in the 7th grade curriculum, for students as young as 12 years old. It lists dating behaviors, including touching under a partner's clothes and having sex. It explains that a dental dam is placed over the vulva or anus during oral sex, and that saran wrap can be used for this purpose. I'm thinking that most parents find this information objectionable. It also presents role-playing scenario where a boy asks a girl if they can try having sex without a condom. The boy says that he can pull out before he comes. Then in 8th grade, so for children as young as 13 years old, it normalizes child sex and introduces the idea of multiple sex partners. It discusses places where teens can obtain protection methods for free or little cost, and that these services are confidential and don't require parental permission. It encourages children that they have a right to seek out sexual pleasure. And this, of course, this is where you really see the philosophy of Alfred Kinsey coming through, this idea of children having sexual rights. That is, of course, we know that education is never neutral. It always comes from some kind of underlying worldview or philosophy. And so you really, as you examine all of the CSE material, you begin to really see Alfred Kinsey's philosophies and worldview come through. So then we have, this is another curriculum, Informed and in Charge. This is taught in Lynn Public Schools right now. This is a middle school curriculum, and this is considered a CSE curriculum. Now this curriculum, I found some of the most alarming stuff in my evaluation in Informed and in Charge. So this refers students to the sexuality, where students are instructed to discuss and list several activities such as fetish, fantasy, pornography, abortion, and sex toys in the sections on the worksheet. So the top of the tree is for listing items that might apply to the people you are dating or having sex with. And you can see on the bottom of this worksheet, there's a list of about 45 different activities. And then you're instructed to the students have to discuss these between themselves and then put them on the appropriate place on the tree. This also, Informed and in Charge also refers students to the Scarleteen website. Now, one of the 15 elements that I mentioned previously is that CSE refers students to harmful resources. And so this would be an illustration of that. So in the curriculum, and all of the curriculum does this, where it recommends outside resources for students and outside additional websites and videos and articles and books. And so Scarleteen is one of those outside resources that the students are referred to. Now on the Scarleteen website, you can find all sorts of really graphic material there. So one of the articles that I came across was how to approach sexual fantasy and desire on your own terms. Just recently, I was on the site again, and they did a series of articles on pornography. Now, of course, you know, they talk through pornography and explain to the students that it's not, pornography is not realistic, it's not real life, but in doing so, in explaining that this is just kind of an exaggerated sexual scenario, that's what pornography presents, it ends up giving them a complete education on the ins and outs of making pornography. It's really, really incredible. But what was even more alarming is that within that article, that series of articles, you can click on different keywords and it actually brings the students to videos on YouTube where porn stars are being interviewed. So these are the kinds of materials that our students are being sent to. And as parents, you may never know. If you don't have controls on your students' devices that keeps track of where they're clicking, you may never know where they're going or where they're even being referred to. So also on the Scarleteen website, students can buy items, condoms, and lube from the Slippery Slope stockpile. So it's really just lots of gross, explicit content on this website, and this is where our kids are being sent. Then we have, of course, books that the students are being recommended to. So this would be considered another harmful resource. So this book here, It's Perfectly Normal by Robbie Harris. This book is listed for students as recommended reading for 10 to 15-year-olds in Planned Parenthood's Get Real curriculum and as a core text in Our Whole Lives. It contains 67 nude illustrations, including children masturbating, adults having sex, and a male putting on a condom. It also discusses abortion in this book and equates abortion, elective abortion, to a woman experiencing a miscarriage. So it's not even presenting any of these issues factually or really including all the information about them. So really upsetting. Here are some pictures from the book. And I think that most parents would find that objectionable, and that you don't need to show your child pictures, nude illustrations to teach them about sex. I used some books in teaching my children on these topics, and they did not include explicit pictures like this. It's just not necessary. So another curriculum is Our Whole Lives, put out by the UUA and the UCC. So these are two church organizations, actually. So in their grades 4 through 6 curriculum, which is for ages 10 through 12, they use It's Perfectly Normal, the book I just highlighted, as a core text. But I want you to kind of look at this here. It asserts that sexuality is something you have from the moment you were born. So again, we're seeing the Alfred Kinsey philosophy come through. Then in a section called When Would I, it encourages children to consider what age they might be when they watch pornography, let someone see them nude, bathe or shower with someone, masturbate with someone, or have sexual intercourse with someone. It also affirms gender fluidity and conformity. And then the grades for grades 7 through 9, it teaches outer course, defined as lovemaking without penetration inside a vagina, anus, or mouth. And outer course activities might include things like hot talk, sexy stares, erotic fantasy, spicy role plays, sensual massage, showering or bathing together, striptease, mutual masturbation, phone or email sex, and dry sex. And it also teaches children how to consent to unlawful sexual activity. Because here in Massachusetts, it is unlawful for a minor age 16 or younger to participate in sexual activity, either with somebody their own age or somebody younger. So you'll see that this is a big theme in CSE, is teaching how to consent to sexual activity. And yet, these students who are being taught this are not even legally capable of consent here in Massachusetts. So then we have Our Whole Lives for grades 10 through 12. And this is for students ages 16 through 18. So it asks how many sexual partners students have had in the last 30 days. It asks students in which kind of relationship would they be willing to do various activities, such as skinny dipping, stimulating someone's nipples, watching an erotic movie or book, or giving fellatio. It promotes abortion and encourages students to become sexual rights activists and to participate in peer-to-peer sex education. And I'll be explaining that more in just a minute. Moving right along to Making Proud Choices. This is a role-playing curriculum where the students kind of pair off and they act out various sexual scenarios. Many of the scenarios just imply that teens are sexually active, and it teaches them how to negotiate condom use and obtain consent for sex. It also encourages detailed condom demonstrations using penis models and suggests ways to make condom use more pleasurable. One of the videos in the DVD component of this curriculum shows animated figures acting out vaginal, anal, and oral sex. Making Proud Choices. Here's a sample scenario from this curriculum. So your parents are out late. Your boyfriend or girlfriend comes over hoping to have sex with you. Person 1, I don't have a condom. Using those things is whack. I can't even feel you. It doesn't feel good. And then person 2 is supposed to say, that's not true. I can show you how using one can feel good. So, you know, the proponents of this curriculum would say, well, we present this scenario so that the kids can learn to come to the right decision, the proper decision in this scenario, which in their estimation would be, you know, convincing the other person to use a condom. So, but what this exercise fails to even mention, it just fails to mention that abstinence is actually an option. It just assumes that children will engage in the sexual act. But what else is being accomplished through having the students work through these very explicit scenarios is that it's introducing ideas and content to the students that they may have never thought about. So then we have High School Flash, which is another curriculum being used here in Massachusetts. This curriculum teaches youth where they can go to purchase protection for sexual activity or to have an abortion, and frequently refers students to Planned Parenthood resources. It also normalizes anal and oral sex and gives detailed instruction on consenting to sexual acts. It includes sexual role play scenarios and heavily emphasizes transgender ideology, which we're going to talk about in a minute, going as far as to avoid using the word woman and to instead use the term person with a uterus and ovaries. Okay, so moving forward, I'd like to now, well, let me just say one thing about some of the outside groups that are teaching CSE, and then we're going to move into talking about the transgender ideology that's being pushed through CSE and also through other means. So we have outside groups, various outside groups are coming into Massachusetts schools to teach sex ed. So, and it's being handled differently in districts across Massachusetts. Some districts will have the health teacher will teach it, or the gym teacher, or the science teacher, but in some districts, outside organizations are actually coming in to teach sex ed. So some of the groups coming in are Advocates for Youth, Planned Parenthood, and Girls Inc. And we're finding that in districts where an outside group is teaching sex ed, that it's been difficult for parents to be able to view the curriculum. So schools will continually supply just an outline of topics that's being presented by the group, but not the actual content. And so when we talk through some action items for parents in just a few minutes, we'll go through how you should obtain information from your school district. But just be aware that if an outside group is teaching sex ed, it has been in some instances a little more difficult to get the information, and so you just have to know how to ask the right questions, and I'll help you with that in just a minute. So, dangerous transgender ideology. So transgenderism is actually being promoted in our schools through various means. Through anti-bullying programs like Jeff Peratti's Safe Schools program for LGBT youth. I attended one of his presentations in my school district, and I thought, you know, initially when I found the advertisement for this event, it was open to the community. It was really advertised as a way to make sure all of our students are safe from bullying. And so I thought, well, that's something I can get behind because I don't want anyone to be mistreated, even if maybe, you know, I disagree with them on various different ideas or issues. I don't want anybody to be mistreated. So let me go take a look at this presentation. So I did, I attended, and it became very apparent to me that this really had nothing to do with anti-bullying. It had everything to do with transgender ideology. So some of the ways that that is being accomplished is through these programs that's presenting a very controversial view on issues of gender and sex, and it definitely marginalizes families, parents, and parents who may be teaching their children different views on these issues. And then one of the things that really struck me during this presentation is that Jeff Perotti had on the stage there during his presentation about 30 different storybooks intended for elementary students that he said are being implemented in all of the classrooms across the state of Massachusetts. So there are storybooks that are pushing these ideologies to the kids through storybooks. And so parents have to be very vigilant about what's happening, particularly in the elementary grades. And let me just say that CSE is mostly being taught in middle school and high school, although there are some elements of it that is being introduced in puberty education, which is happening in some school districts in 4th and 5th grade. But the transgender ideology is really being pushed beginning in preschool and kindergarten. So, and I'll show you some more samples of how that's happening. But then also there are social transition parties that happen. So what this is if you have a child in 1st or 2nd grade, or any elementary age, if they want to transition to identifying as the opposite sex, Jeff Perotti will come in and do a social transition party for the class. And many times this is happening and the other parents don't even know what's happening. So these are just some really dangerous things happening to our young students in elementary school. Jeff Perotti, during his presentation, actually shared videos of kindergartners, 1st and 2nd graders sharing their transgender stories and their transitioning stories. And I thought to myself, I just couldn't even believe, honestly, what I was seeing. I mean, we don't trust our 6- and 7-year-olds really to cross the street without holding their hand, and but we're letting them choose their own gender and setting them up for just a lot of heartache. And of course, these kids are then being pushed into using puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones and then eventually body mutilating surgeries. So these are things that can wreck this person's life for the rest of their lives. Just really, really dangerous stuff. So these are the things that are happening in our elementary schools, and we really need to be aware. And then, of course, the dangerous transgender ideology is coming in through the CSE curriculum. And then books in school libraries are promoting this. So, like, for instance, this book, Beyond Magenta. Author and photographer Susan Copeland interviewed 6 transgender or gender-neutral youth and put together this book. Now, here's a quote from the book. "From 6 up, I used to kiss other guys in my neighborhood, make out with them, perform oral sex on them. I liked it. I used to love oral. I touched their you-know-whats. We were young, but that's what we did." This is a child 6 years old. Now, I read excerpts from this book and my heart goes out to these young people who were victimized and were not protected by the adults in their life. Okay, moving forward, these are some of the graphics that are being used in Massachusetts elementary schools to teach this ideology. So you have the genderbread person, the gender unicorn, the gender snowman. So all of these illustrate to the students that sex and gender are on a spectrum. Okay, let's just go over some fast facts about transgenderism. Now, in my Massachusetts Informed Parents group on Facebook, I do have a transgender, a guide for parents on transgender issues, and I took these fast facts right from that book. So I highly encourage you, after today's presentation, that you visit the group and you can download that book for free. You can also download that book from the MFI website as well. But one study has showed that when a teen announces a transgender identity to their peer group, the number of friends who also became transgender identified was 3.5 per group. So this is actually becoming what some psychological journals are calling social contagion, and we can see that happening. And then girls as young as 13 are undergoing double mastectomies, and boys as young as 17 are undergoing full genital sex reassignment surgeries. So some really alarming harms are being done to children underneath the guise here of transgenderism. And, you know, research also shows that people who identify as transgender and who go on to have surgery, that they are actually 20 times more likely to die from suicide than the general population. So definitely time to sound the alarm and to act to protect our young people. Okay, so now I'd like to just kind of point out a few things which any person with common sense could figure out just even from the information I've presented so far. But CSE doesn't even meet its own objective. So CSE proponents claim that their approach to sex ed delays sexual debut in minors and decreases unhealthy risk-taking behaviors. But out of 60 school-based CSE studies examined, no evidence of continued effectiveness at reducing teen pregnancy or instance of sexually transmitted infections was found. It did not achieve additional targeted outcomes, producing an 88% failure rate for delayed sexual activity and a 94% failure rate for reducing unprotected sex for teens. But that's not surprising. So what do the experts say about CSE? Ascend is an organization that promotes sexual risk avoidance education. It states that teens report that CSE makes them feel more pressure to have sex than the pressure they feel from their romantic partners. Nearly 1 in 4 teens say that CSE sex education classes make them feel that teen sex is an expectation. And that's really no surprise when you see how much sexually explicit material is in the curriculum. So another expert, and Monica Klein, she's a very important voice in addressing this issue. So Monica Klein is a former sex educator for Planned Parenthood and the founder of Reclaiming Parenthood. She states the following about Planned Parenthood's sex education program: that it's the perfect vehicle for Planned Parenthood to promote social change and to proselytize youth towards sexual promiscuity and abortion. It's the perfect business plan for a lifelong customer. Sexual intimacy is redefined from being special for marriage or for having babies to being crass, seeking pleasure over meaningful relationships, accepting STDs as a way of life, and terminating the lives of babies so we can worship our sexual rights without hindrance. And here's what she was taught by Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood taught her that parents are a barrier to service. So this is coming from somebody who was actually on the inside of this issue. And one day, as she was teaching her Planned Parenthood sex education to her students, she said that one of her students raised her hand, a little girl, and said, "Mrs. Klein, do I have to participate do I have to be sexually active?" And it dawned on her that with this girl was getting her student was getting the impression that she was expected to be sexually active. And that was kind of a turning point for Monica when she realized what her brand of sex education, what Planned Parenthood's brand of sex education was doing to students. And she eventually stopped doing that and is now a very outspoken voice against this type of sex education. So now let's talk about what Planned Parenthood is teaching our kids about STDs. And this is really coming through in the CSE curriculum. So just recently, actually, Boston 25 News reported that STDs are on the rise for youth and students don't seem to be concerned. In 2018, 15 to 24-year-old boys and men made up nearly 60% of chlamydia cases. The idea that STDs are not a big deal and can be treated is being promoted by Planned Parenthood and others. Now, remember when I mentioned peer-to-peer sex education? So this is what I meant by that. So Planned Parenthood actually has a program called the Get Real Teen Council, and students in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade can apply to be part of this Get Real Teen Council. And Planned Parenthood will train them to teach sex education in middle school to students as young as 12 years old. So you have potentially students as young as 15 teaching students as young as 12 various different things like how to consent to sex and that STIs are no big deal. So every month on Planned Parenthood's Facebook page, the Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, their Facebook page, they will feature a Get Real Teen Council Member of the Month. And they always ask them to answer 2 questions. The first question is, one thing I love about being a sexual health peer educator is, and then the student will say what they love about being a peer educator. And then the other question is, one fact I wish everyone knew about sexual health, and then they answer that question. So this particular student who was featured one month, Sean from 11th grade, says that STIs are normal. So Planned Parenthood is teaching the students that it's normal to have an STI. Most people have STIs, and that STIs can be treated. And of course, Planned Parenthood not only provides abortion and transgender hormone therapy, but they also provide STI treatments. So STIs, but in reality, STIs may cause serious life-threatening complications, including cancers, infertility, ectopic pregnancy, spontaneous abortions, stillbirth, low birth rate, neurological damage, and death. And yet Planned Parenthood is teaching our kids in our schools that STIs are normal. So some really alarming stuff. So I just want to kind of go through really quick next, just a brief explanation of the health frameworks. So the health frameworks are guidelines that are put out by DESE. Remember, DESE is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Now, they suggest topics that have to be covered under each required subject, and sex education falls under health frameworks. So the frameworks are not actual curriculum content. They're simply just an outline of topics. So if you ask your school district to see what sex ed curriculum is being taught in your school and they only provide you the frameworks, this could mean that they are trying to hide objectionable content from you. So I just want parents to understand, and here's where maybe I can just explain really briefly what the law is in Massachusetts. So sex ed is currently not required to be taught in school in the state of Massachusetts, but school districts can choose to teach it or choose not to teach it. Most school districts in Massachusetts are already teaching it. But under Massachusetts law, the school district is required to inform parents if they are teaching it, when they are teaching it, and what curriculum they are using. And they have to provide an opt-out for parents. So if parents want to opt their children out, they should be able to do that with no repercussions for the students. And then they also are required to make the curriculum reasonably available to the parents to come and to see the curriculum. So what I'm finding is, as I'm working with parents all across the state to find out what is happening in their school district, I'm finding that when they go to their school district and they ask, a lot of times parents are just getting back a copy of the frameworks. And if you're not an educator, you may not understand the difference between the frameworks and the curriculum. And the frameworks, of course, it lists a bunch of topics that may not be concerning to parents, things like healthy relationships, you know, how to have good hygiene and all of these things, which, you know, many of these things are fine topics, but you have this explicit and graphic content hiding behind words, unsuspecting words. And so if you ask your school district what curriculum you're using and they only give you the frameworks, then that should be a little bit of a clue that maybe they are hiding something from you. Okay, so let's move on. So I just want to point out too that the frameworks here in Massachusetts, one of the sources that they consulted in writing the health framework is SIECUS. And SIECUS is the Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States. SIECUS was started by Mary Calderon in 1964, a medical doctor at Planned Parenthood of America and an associate of Alfred Kinsey, there's that name again, who asserted that children are sexual from birth and should be allowed to participate in sexual activity. And then Kinsey, as I stated before, conducted his work using research compiled from pedophiles. Now, you'll see that the marketing for SICUS, they actually just kind of redid their whole branding, and they're not even hiding their true intentions anymore. They say now, right, their tagline is sex ed for social change. So they are deliberately trying to bring about changing the gender norms and the sexual norms of society. Okay. Now the SICUS guidelines recommend that children ages 5 through 8, this is just a little window into some of the SICUS guidelines, and I actually have the entire document of the SICUS guidelines is found in the files section of my Massachusetts Informed Parents group, so if you want to read through the whole thing, you can do that. But here's just an example. So for ages 5 through 8, they recommend that children be taught about masturbation and abortion, and that middle school, high school students be taught about sexual fantasies, and that looking at pornography will, quote unquote, enhance sexual pleasure. Educators are encouraged to fill in the gaps where the curriculum isn't specific enough. So what I would like to know, and what I would like to ask of Desi, is who sets the standards for filling in the gaps? How will your child's teacher instruct your son or daughter on human sexuality? So great freedom is given to teachers, and depending, you know, I think many teachers also find this content objectionable and they wouldn't be comfortable teaching it. But there are also some activist educators in our schools now who are teaching this and who are pushing it. And so we really need to know what's going on in our child's classroom. Okay. Now, Michael will talk about the sex ed mandate during his presentation, but let me just give you this brief explanation. So the sex ed mandate, or the Healthy Youth Act, this bill would force schools to use sex ed that's tied to a curriculum framework. And I just explained to you what that framework was. So the framework currently just serves as a guideline for schools on what topics to teach for each subject. But the Healthy Youth Act will make the framework a standard that all schools teaching sex ed must follow. So this takes control over sex ed out of the hands of local schools and parents and gives it all to DESE. So it will really make it difficult for parents to object to what's being taught. So for instance, if the Healthy Youth Act were to pass, now it has already passed the Senate just about a little over a month ago or so, 33-2. It has not been brought to the House yet for a vote, and let's hope that it stays that way. But if this were to pass and the governor was to sign it and it becomes law, then parents would show up. Here's how it would work out, because our legislators are saying, oh, no, it's not a mandate, but it is. It's a real clever way of creating a mandate. So if parents show up to their local school district and they say, you've decided to teach sex ed, we want sex ed taught in the school, but we don't want CSE. We'd like a different approach to sex ed. So what will happen is the school district will say, sorry, DESE has been given full control by the law, and they tell us, DESE tells us what has to be taught for sex ed. So then the parents will then go to DESE and will go and ask DESE, DESE, we do not want CSE being taught in our schools. We want a different approach to sex ed. And then DESE will say, well, the law has given us full authority and has told us that we have to teach CSE. So it's really kind of a sneaky way of creating a mandate, all while maintaining the illusion of local control. Because see, school districts don't have to teach sex ed, so they won't be forced to teach sex ed. But the legislators know that most districts are already teaching sex ed. So in this way, it becomes a mandate. So the other way that it becomes a mandate is that So even though the mandate will still include an opt-out, but with the amount of explicit material in CSE, children are still at risk of exposure through peer relationships. So of course, we are recommending parents to opt their children out. That, you know, that's the best thing that they can do. One of the good things that they can do, but it doesn't fully protect a child. And so there's just some really alarming elements to this piece of legislation, of course. So, and another interesting piece of information is that the framework, the health framework, is currently being rewritten. So the Senate just passed a bill mandating a framework that's not even fully rewritten yet or edited. So we're not even sure what they passed, although we have a good idea of what's going to be in it, since we know that Planned Parenthood is on the panel that is updating the framework. Okay, moving on. So I'm getting ready to wrap up here. So there is a better way to approach sex education. So what we are not against sex education, of course. Massachusetts Informed Parents and Massachusetts Family Institute believes that it's best for parents to teach sex education to their children. But we do understand that there are some students who won't have the support that they need at home, and that some school districts and some local communities might want to include it in their health curriculum. So in those cases, though, we would like it to be a healthy approach to sex ed. So sexual risk avoidance education actually emphasizes developing healthy relationships and delaying sexual activity until marriage. It focuses on goal setting and how delaying sexual activity can help students maintain their vision of future goals and dreams. The message is clear: for optimal sexual health, sexual delay is the only 100% effective way to avoid pregnancy, STIs, and other negative consequences of teen sex. So if we're going to do sex ed in the schools, if we're going to teach sex ed in the schools, let's approach it from a way that really sets our students up for success and for healthy behaviors. So, you know, one of the things that Planned Parenthood claims is that, well, kids they're all sexually active, and so this is why they need this how-to instruction of how to minimize risk, how to reduce risk. But that's actually not even true. So youth are actually increasingly choosing to wait to have sex. Studies show that if teens have even just one adult in their lives supporting their choice to wait, they will be more successful. Between 1991 and 2017, the percentage of high schoolers that never engaged in sexual intercourse increased by 32%. And over the past 26 years, the percentage of girls waiting has increased by 27%, and for boys, 38%. So you see here that just even what CSE proponents, the reasons that they are claiming that we really need CSE in the schools, even those reasons are not entirely accurate. So the SRA philosophy is actually states that teen sex is a risky behavior, even with contraception, condoms, and consent. Sexual risk reduction methods, which is SRR, is another acronym that you'll hear for CSE. It's just another name for CSE. And proponents of CSE did that on purpose so that it would be confused with SRA, because as you can imagine, Planned Parenthood and others who are promoting CSE are on a campaign to undermine SRA. So if you see SRR, don't confuse it for SRA. It is not SRA, it's actually CSE. So SRR methods are not taught because that leaves teens still at risk. So SRA, they don't teach SRR methods. So the failure rate of oral contraception among youth is actually 15 to 27%. And according to the CDC, condoms have an 18% failure rate among teens. So, and then, you know, of course, the Gardasil shot, which is being promoted, It only protects against 4 out of the 100 strands. And so it ends up giving kids a false sense of immunity when they're leaving the doctor's office. So a lot of just false ideas and limited information, really scientific information and just risk information that's given to our students through CSE that sets them up for negative consequences. SRA is definitely a better approach. And SRA is very supportive and non-judgmental. This is another criticism that SRA is receiving from Planned Parenthood, is that it's very judgmental and that it shames students. But that's just simply not true. SRA emphasizes the importance of youth talking with their parents and their guardians and their pediatrician. It promotes transparency with their guardians. It suggests contacting supportive services if a student does not have a trusted adult to talk to at home. It encourages youth to make healthy choices based on knowing all the risks, and it empowers youth to change their lifestyle if needed. So all of the items that the legislation is claiming they want to assert in the schools, things like being medically accurate, evidence-based, age-appropriate, CSE actually does not meet any of those standards, and SRA meets all of those standards. So just an important piece of information. So as we're wrapping up here, it's really important to know that we can and we must act. And action actually changes things. Now, I know that it feels like that if you share the opinion of Massachusetts Informed Parents and Massachusetts Family Institute, that you are in the minority view. But what I am finding is that the message that I am bringing, both in the Massachusetts Informed Parents group and as I network and reach out and establish relationships and rapport with parents all over the state, is that the message is resonating. A lot of parents find what's happening with this curriculum and in the schools regarding these issues to be very objectionable. And it's just that, parents have been kind of silenced by fear of being mischaracterized as a prude, as somebody stuck in the dark ages, as somebody who doesn't, want to address these issues, somebody who's afraid to talk about these issues with their kids. And really, we need to stop being afraid, and we need to find our voice. And I find that that's what's actually happening with Massachusetts Informed Parents. Parents are coming into the group, and they're finding other parents that live in their district, and they're realizing, wow, there are other parents in my district who feel the same as I do about these issues. And it's been really wonderful to see groups of parents beginning to lock arms and work together to bring change in their school districts. We can do it. So just a couple of quick action items, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Michael, because he has a lot of encouragement and some inspiring victory stories that he wants to share with us, and that can illustrate how we can bring about some positive change. So first of all, you need to find out what is happening in your school district. And I have in the file section on Massachusetts Informed Parents an action items list. You can find that in a file section. It gives you some really practical information on how to address this with your school district, what kinds of questions to ask. You want to be very specific in the way that you ask questions so you can get the maximum amount of information. So make sure you check out that file in the Massachusetts Informed Parents group. Of course, you want to opt your child out of sex ed, and I do have sample opt-out letters that you can use right in the file section of MIP as well. If you're not already a member of MIP, you want to join, and you also want to invite your other like-minded people and friends to join the group as well. You want to tell your friends about scheduling a parent forum, just like today, for your church or community group. Right now we're doing these online. We have been doing them in person and traveling the state. Hopefully we'll be able to do those again soon. But also online events are great too. It allows people to participate who might have trouble with childcare and who can't get to a physical meeting. So certainly spread the word about that. And then petition your school district to teach SRA instead of CSE. Run for school committee. We need some really engaged parents to run for school committee, to be a voice of reason on these issues. And then, of course, the only full way to protect your child from some of this content is to either homeschool or private school. So we encourage you that if you feel like that's a good option for your family, to reach out to us as well. We do have some resources that we can help you with those decisions as well. And I would love to see more churches open up small, affordable church schools and pastors to use their church buildings. Many church buildings are just sitting empty all week and they have classrooms. I would love to see more community involvement and just parents and families and churches and community leaders lock arms and just provide quality education for our kids. So there's lots of creative ways that we can address this issue, but we must address it. We have to address it. And please come to Massachusetts Informed Parents Group. It's where we are equipping parents to protect their kids. And so I hope that you found today very helpful. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael to do his presentation next and hear what he has to say. I know he always has a lot of encouraging things to share. Michael?
So thanks, Mary Ellen. That was very informative, and greatly appreciate you taking the time to go through all of that. And we didn't mention this from the beginning, but it seems like a lot of people that have gotten online to this presentation are asking questions. So if you'd like to ask any questions, we'll try and get those answered for you during this particular presentation. But Mary Ellen, do you have access? Can you bring up the PowerPoint that I had sent you, regarding some of these victories we want to talk about? And as soon as you get that, if you could bring that up, that'd be great. But there are a lot of encouraging things to talk about. I also want to talk about things on the legislative end of things. So Mary Ellen touched base on the sex ed mandate bill that we're concerned about, and basically she said that this would take away local control over your school committee's ability to choose the sex education that you feel is appropriate for your town or city. So basically what it does is it creates a list of sex ed curricula that are considered age appropriate, medically accurate, and evidence-based, but according to the state's definition of that. And of course, we don't think that the state agrees with us. We know the state doesn't agree with us on what we believe to be age appropriate. I mean, if you just saw Mary Ellen's presentation, that is not age appropriate for our children. So there are many things we can do. One of the main things we want you as parents to understand is to opt your children out of sex education in the public school. We want to create a movement across the state to have so many parents opting out of sex education that we create a conversation with the school, that we force that conversation with the school, because so many kids are opting out. And now the school asks you, the parent, okay, what would you like us to be teaching at school? And we do have curricula that would be age appropriate, that would be evidence-based, that would be medically accurate. Mary Ellen mentioned one of those, which is Healthy Futures, or it used to be called Healthy Futures. It's now called New Culture. I believe there's a middle school curriculum for that, and I believe that the author is currently working on a high school curriculum as well. So be proactive, get in touch with other parents. We believe, and we've seen this happen in other states, that it could take just 5 parents, maybe 10 parents, to individually go to your principal and ask, what are you teaching my kids? And is this really age appropriate? If you have any questions, if you want us to do any research, we will also do public records information requests on your behalf. And when we do those, the school has 10 days in which to initially respond with that curriculum. We've been very successful so far to get that information from the schools. As you've seen from Mary Ellen's presentation, much of that information that we've been able to gather, we've been able to present to you today. So please go to your school, be proactive, ask what they're teaching. Many times, if you just get the title of the curricula and you give that to us, we can help you understand what's in that curriculum. Please contact Mary Ellen on the Facebook page at Massachusetts Informed Parents. You can get in touch with me through even my cell phone, 978-204-9131. I think I put that in one of the chats there as well. Again, 978-204-9131. But Marianne, if you're able to bring that, I think I see that PowerPoint. If you can bring that PowerPoint up and we can go through that. So if you want to just go to that next slide and we'll get into some of this stuff. We'll try to wrap this up in about 10 minutes or so. So again, Massachusetts Family Institute in partnership with Massachusetts Informed Parents to help parents understand what exactly is being taught in our public schools, especially in the middle school and the high school. Even though a lot of what Mary Ellen talked about regarding the gender ideology is being taught in our elementary schools as low as preschool. So again, I mentioned Stop the Sex Ed mandate in our Massachusetts schools. Again, text the word, if you text the word education to the 797979 short code, you'll actually receive a text back with more information on what we're talking about and also links to those opt-out forms, because you may not know where to go access those. So we have actually written up opt-out forms for you that you can just print out on your own. So again, text the word education to 797979. And if you want to flip ahead there, so again, Mary Ellen mentioned so much of our sex ed is taught by Planned Parenthood, and we would not want to have it mandated that now you have to pick from a list that is dominated by organizations like Planned Parenthood. So if you go to the next slide there, Mary Ellen, this is a picture of the group of us that went down to the State House when the Senate was voting on the sex ed mandate. And this was fairly recent, maybe 3 months ago. And as you can see there, that the Senate approved the sex ed mandate in the Senate 33-2. So you can see that our senators especially need to hear from us. One of our senators, we just found out recently, was completely okay with the Our Whole Lives curriculum for his children, knowing that there's a lesson in there that redefines abstinence as things like anal sex and oral sex. So I guess as long as it's safe, it's completely okay. But we know that this is just over-sexualizing children and causing them to be more curious and more sexually active. So please get in touch with your legislator and let them know, especially in the House, because it's just the Senate that has passed it 33-2. As overwhelming as that is, it still would need to be passed by the House and still need to be signed by the governor. And I'll tell you, I was just listening in on a conversation just 2 days ago from the other side that are doing these virtual forums and making this sex ed mandate a priority, even in this time of everything being, shut down at the State House. So the contraception deception, and again, this is just some highlights, or I should say lowlights from the curriculum that we've been able to come across. But these next two slides show examples of what they're teaching our kids in terms of contraception. So Marianne, if you want to go to that next one. So this is just a list of all the different contraception that we believe is just making kids more curious. It's not protecting kids, it's actually making them more curious and saying, you know what, as long as I protect myself through these different resources, whether it's saran wrap, as Mary Ellen mentioned, or dental dams, or the list goes on. If you go to that next slide, Mary Ellen, you'll see that here's a whole nother list of contraceptive. Here we go. You see the first line there says wait. So they're talking about abstinence. So they always say, yeah, we do teach abstinence. Well, look there. It's the first line on this chart of probably what, 12, 13, 14 different options for contraception. And abstinence is just a small part of that. So if you want to So abstinence redefined, and I talk about abstinence being redefined in the Our Whole Lives curriculum. There's an actual lesson that's called redefining abstinence, and it lists about 30 different activities that clearly are not, as you and I would define them, abstinence, but because the philosophy is just because it's safe, it's completely okay. This is really a dangerous slippery slope for our young people. If you go to the next slide there, orientation and gender redefined. Mary Ellen talked some about this as well. If you go to the next slide, you'll see 3 different curriculum. She talked about the gender-bred person being offered. Again, telling our young people that your gender comes from your brain and has nothing to do with your anatomy. I mean, clearly this is not medically accurate. And then you go to the next slide and you'll see the gender unicorn. And this is being offered to preschoolers. So, is a 4-year-old going to understand 5 different spectrums between masculinity and femininity? And then if you go to the next slide there, you'll see this is a high school curriculum that is offered that is very is very concerning because it's not medically accurate. It's, if you can see at the top of that assignment, it's basically saying that your gender can change in 24 hours. Choose how you want to identify today because tomorrow it could change. Is this medically accurate? And then you have 5 different spectrums there between masculine and feminine. I always point out the first one, biological sex, what the doctor assigned you at birth. So is it medically accurate to tell our children that your gender was assigned by your doctor, or did you anatomically present through how your body is as what gender you are? Is this medically accurate to say that the assignment of the doctor is how you determine gender? And then the 4th line down talks about gender presentation and basically, how does the world see you, right? So I always bring the example of, when I was 12 years old, my voice hadn't, changed into those lower registers as most of the boys around me. And so I was singing in the choir, and the section of the choir I was singing in was the soprano section. So how does the world see me? Well, the world would probably see me as a little more feminine, maybe not all the way on the total side of femininity, but maybe somewhere in between. And now I start to question, as a 12-year-old, think what it must be like to be a tomboy today and to, be a girl that likes to do boy things, and now to start to question. And that's really what we're concerned about, is kids that never questioned before are now starting to question because of what they're learning at school. And this next slide shows an assignment that came to us from, I believe, either Tewksbury or Tingsboro, asking kids to define the difference between biological sex and assigned sex at birth. And this is why parents come to us and they say, my child came home and said that I'm out of touch regarding my traditional understanding of gender and orientation. And it's because they feel like they're getting such an academic understanding at school that mom and dad haven't had the privilege of having such an academic understanding. And so our concern isn't necessarily that our kids are going to change their gender identity or sexual orientation, which many times, unfortunately, they do. But the concern is that they're going to start asking questions that they would have never asked before. So parents, definitely be aware of what they're teaching your kids in public school. Here's an example of a musical that was done in the Wayland High School called Pronoun. And this is a musical based on this whole transgender agenda, further normalizing this for our children. So if you go to the next slide, and you'll see here just some details on that musical drama by Evan Placey, rated PG-13. The synopsis: Josh and Isabella are childhood sweethearts. They were meant to spend their gap year together. They're meant to be together forever. But Isabella has now become a boy. A love story about transition, testosterone, and James Dean. Evan Placey's Pronoun is a play about a transgender teenager exploring the impact on friends and family of an individual's decision to undergo gender transition. Again, further normalizing what we believe to be really a dangerous ideology. Marianne talked about this, the sexuality tree. Have you ever heard of the family tree, right? Well, now this is being redefined as the sexuality tree. and telling kids that they need to view all of their relationships, whether it's in their immediate family, whether it's in their social circles, all through the sexual prism. A very dangerous ideology to be normalizing in our public schools. And next slide. It shows some of the victories I wanted to tell you about. So just a great victory in Worcester this past year, 2019 in February. Several of us showed up to the school committee meeting in Worcester, and probably about 75 of us showed up on a Thursday night and just gave our testimony about why we were concerned. And I had the opportunity to read directly out of the Our Whole Lives curriculum and other curriculums, Making Proud Choices, these kinds of things. And, you know, because of our testimony, because we brought light, we put light on the Planned Parenthood curricula, we were able to stop Planned Parenthood in Worcester. So think about that, 75 people in a city of 100,000 or more were able to push back against the Planned Parenthood ideology and have victory. That Worcester is the second largest city in Massachusetts. It's the second largest city in New England, as I understand. And 75 people were able to have that kind of impact. And if you look through these next slides, you'll see just some other pictures from the evening there in Worcester. So, you know, never let anyone tell you that you can't make a difference, you know, even as a small group of people. And then this was in Lynn recently, where Lynn wanted to okay contraceptive at these on-site health clinics at their middle school and high schools. Unfortunately, they passed this you know, bill that we were very concerned about, because now instead of having to, you know, go down to the CVS to get a shot of hormonal contraceptive like the Depo shot, which is a 3-month shot that can, you know, studies have been known from Johns Hopkins University to cause cancer, different types of cancer. But now we're going to give this out to kids in middle school and high school right there at our public schools. When, you know, I always make this point that our kids need parental consent to go get a Tylenol at school, but now they don't need parental consent to go get a Depo shot, 3 months of hormonal contraceptive that can have horrible consequences on their health. So you can see from those pictures in Lynn, you see, you know, usually you don't see that many people at a school committee meeting, but this is people from the local church in Lynn coming out, and we outnumbered Girls Inc. that night, Planned Parenthood that night, and let our voices be heard, you know, in the city of Lynn. Next slide. So as Mary Ellen said, schedule a parent forum, see exactly what is being taught to your children, opt your children out, text the word again, education to 797979. One of the easiest things you can do now, I mean, now that school's out, obviously it's been a forced opt-out to a certain extent, but when kids go back to school, let's opt all of our children out of this explicit pornographic sex education. You can get the link to those opt-out forms by just texting education to 797979, and you'll get a return text with a link to the opt-out forms, and those come in Spanish and English. Here's a picture of one of the parent forums we did in Stoneham. This was on a rainy Monday night. We had 50 people come out in Stoneham, Massachusetts, to the local library. So definitely be encouraged. You know, before you know, so many of the institutions were shut down in Massachusetts, we had about 20 of these already planned for the month of January, February, and March. But, you know, now being able to do this online, we'll be providing for you a link that you can, you know, send out to other concerned parents of this presentation if you found this helpful for you. So again, text the word education to 797979 and stop the sex education mandate and opt your kids out today. You know, even though the State House, there's not a lot going on there in terms of people being able to visit to talk to your legislators, you can still call your legislators And so please, they all have local offices. So just, you can easy as Google them. Google, who is the legislator for your city or town, get their local number and call them and say, you know what? I don't want the state to mandate sex education in Massachusetts. I don't want them to take away local control. I don't think the state really agrees with my opinion on what is age appropriate, what is medically accurate, and even what is evidence-based. I mean, we've had CSC now for at least a decade, and studies show that it has only increased the sexual activity. I mean, look at what Monica Klein said about, the student saying, do I have to have sex, right? That is the message that they're getting from their teachers. Instead of this message of waiting till marriage, waiting till that relationship of marriage where we're now having a sexual relationship will work in the way that God has intended. So we want to just thank you guys so much. We have a couple more slides here. We want you to sign up for the New Boston Post. This is a wonderful online news outlet where you can find out, this story about what happened in Worcester, for example, or what happened in Lynn. You're not going to find that in the Boston Globe, but you will find it at the New Boston Post. So go to the newbostonpost.com. I think the annual charge for that to register to subscribe is $40, but it's such a low cost to get this into your inbox and to really understand what are some of the great things happening in our state, regarding the subjects we're talking about. And then get our Engage the Bay State curriculum. If you go to mafamily.org/engage, you can order your own copies of our Engage the Bay State curriculum. This is a wonderful way to educate your family, to educate your church. There's a chapter in there on sex education. There's a chapter on transgenderism. There's a chapter on orientation. All these subjects that we've been talking about today. There's videos that introduce every chapter. So it's really a wonderful way to educate your family and your church regarding what is going on in our state of Massachusetts regarding these issues. And then lastly, this is what we're up against in Massachusetts. The organizations that represent an anti-life ideology, that represent an LGBTQ ideology, that have an anti-religious liberty ideology. These groups like Planned Parenthood, like GLAAD, like the ACLU, have a budget in Massachusetts, just in Massachusetts, of almost $21 million. And although our State House for the time being is shut down and many other institutions are, we can still be proactive. We can still offer you these virtual parent forums, and we'll be offering much more virtually as time comes to very soon on a lot of the other issues we're concerned about, like the infanticide issue, like the physician-assisted suicide issue, like the commercial marijuana issue, and these things. So definitely stay posted for more information from MFI regarding those issues. But please consider donating to MFI. You can go right on our website and donate as well. And we encourage you and appreciate your willingness to do that, because our children are just too important, and we want to be a resource to you in any way to protect their young minds. So again, text the word education to 797979. Let's stop the education mandate. Call your legislator, especially the governor, especially your local representative. Let's opt out all of our kids from sex education and protect their young minds. So I want to just, again, thank you guys for joining us today on our virtual presentation. As I mentioned, we'll have a YouTube link for you that you can send out to other friends and family that you think would be interested in this. And, let's just continue to spread the word and continue to educate parents so that, we can protect young minds. And Mary Ellen, I'll give you the last word here as well, but so appreciate you coming on today and, sharing all this wonderful data regarding comprehensive sex education in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you everybody who attended today. I'm just so glad that you're here and that you were able to get all of this really great information. And please go to the Massachusetts Informed Parents Facebook group and join today. And then look in the files section. So many of the analyses of these curricula that I highlighted today, there are documents with examples right from the curriculum posted in these documents in the file section of MIP. So if you want the hard evidence and you want to see it with your own eyes, these documents have detailed information listing page numbers and exact quotes from the curriculum. So certainly go to MIP, look in the file section for all the documentation, and of course don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or to reach out to Michael. We are here as a resource, and we just want to build community all over the state of Massachusetts to address these issues and to protect our kids. So thank you so much for being here, and we hope to see you in the future at some of our subsequent events. Thank you so much.